I could barely breathe. The smoke rose into my lungs as I gasped in and out trying to get air. I tried to scream, but my voice was weak. Before I passed out into a soundless sleep, the last thing I heard was him desperately calling my name. I woke with a start. My whole body was shaking. I inhaled 3 times to slow down my breathing as I sat up. This was the 4th time I've had this reoccurring nightmare. Breathe. I slowly rose from my bed to start the day. My eyelids felt heavy, my mouth full of cotton. My mind was foggy, but I was able to concentrate hard enough to grip the toothbrush. As I finished up my bathroom routine, I gracefully descended the steps to the kitchen. I glanced at the clock only to be horrified that it was 20 minutes past the time I was supposed to be at the bus stop. Uh-oh. I quickly flew up the stairs and threw on the first few items I spotted in my dresser. My older brother, who was in college, came pounding on my door almost as soon as I had finished getting dressed. "Sis, what are you doing still home?" I glanced at him and narrowed my eyes. Says the guy who should be in college but knew you just had to stay and clog up my atmosphere. I tossed him the car keys. "I need you to drive me to school." He rolled his eyes. "All right, but you owe me breakfast." I mumbled a few words, and out the door we went. As we pulled into Bright High, butterflies started to fly in my stomach. I was excited. Today marked the official day of James Jerton and I dating for a whole year. James was the most popular guy at Bright High, and one of the best basketball players in our state of Idaho. I was the world's luckiest girl to have someone as handsome and caring as he was. I rushed up the stairs just as the bell rang. Darn. I didn't even have time to go to my locker. I ran quickly to first hour, Algebra 2. I passed several of my friends who insisted on goofing off during class. I entered the classroom in the nick of time as Mr. Kermington turned around. James looked backward and his whole face lit up when he saw me. I smiled. I breezed right through today's lesson and was soon on to my next class. James came up from behind me and grabbed hold of my hand. One of his guy friends passed by and said, "Y'all need to get a room." Everyone laughed. My face turned bright red as James pulled me along through the crowd of juniors. The day passed by with no problem. Spending lunch with James, beating all the guys in volleyball, ruining my enemy's art project? Well, you get the idea. As I headed to the last period, I noticed the lights started to flicker. I thought nothing of it as I entered the classroom. That's when we all heard the first gunshot. I started to freak out. James was all the way on the other side of the school. Everyone started screaming and flailing around. I heard the teacher yell, "Everyone get to the nearest exit now." None of us needed to be told twice. As I tried to stand up, I tripped over a chair that ended up knocking a candle off its base. It caught on fire as soon as it struck the ground, which was wet wood from our science project. I was the only one in the room. I could hear screaming and yelling, and before I got a chance to calm my nerves there was a big bang, bang, boom. I quickly backed into the nearest corner, which is right where the window was. I looked down and began to panic. It turns out my room was not the only room that was on fire. I realized that the loud bang was from the north side of the school exploding. That's where James was. I didn't know what to do. I heard helicopters above, and I could just make out the signs of sirens wailing. I could hear loud pounding as if a giant was stepping throughout the school. Then I heard my name being called from every direction. I quickly stood up, and that was the worst mistake I could ever make. I ended knocking over a propane tank, and had just barely time to lunge towards the door before I heard another loud boom. I started screaming out in agony. The whole left side of me had been burned in my grand escape away from the explosion. As I crouched down, I saw part of the roof collapse and sunlight poured in. The floor beneath me gave way, and I fell a good 30 feet, screaming the entire time. I could barely breathe. The smoke rose into my lungs as I gasped in and out trying to get air. I tried to scream, but my voice was weak. Before I passed out into a soundless sleep, the last thing I heard was James desperately calling my name. My brave prince. When I came to, I was being lifted into strong arms. I knew it was James, he must have found me. I buried my face in his chest as he heroically started to jog to the end where there was an opening. "It's okay," he whispered. I smiled as best I could, and passed out right there in his arms. The last thing I remember was him looking down at me and smiling. When I woke up, the first thing I saw was the bright light. Sunlight was pouring into the hospital room. I glanced around and then I saw James. He quickly got up and was at my beside. He leaned over and kissed my head. "You're all right, I love you," he whispered. I was later informed that there were a couple minor injuries, but thankfully no deaths. James was my brave, handsome prince. Forever and always.